If you grew up in the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, you probably remember playing on one of these massive wooden fortresses. What you might not know is that they're mostly gone now, and they can never be built again. These playgrounds were special. They were wooden kingdoms where splinters were badges of honor, and every climb felt like conquering a castle. For an entire generation of American kids, these towering wooden structures defined childhood adventure. But today, they're mostly replaced by these sanitized plastic alternatives. In today's video, we're diving into the story of America's wooden castle playgrounds, how one man's revolutionary idea conquered the country, and how three forces combined to tear them all down. So sit back and unwind with the Great Rewind. To understand why wooden playgrounds were so revolutionary, you need to see what came before them. And honestly, old American playgrounds were not that great. Picture this: towering metal slides that could literally burn your skin in summer heat, heavy chain swings, and spinning merry-go-rounds that could launch you into orbit. All of this sitting on unforgiving asphalt or concrete. The design philosophy back then was simple. Don't worry about creativity, just keep kids off the street and contain their energy. Many car-related incidents involve kids in the past, so playgrounds were a necessity. But here's the thing, nobody really cared about making them better. They were afterthoughts, built from whatever cheap metal equipment municipalities could order from a catalog. The equipment manufacturers had no incentive to innovate, and why would they? Cities bought the same boring stuff year after year. A slide was a slide, and a swing was a swing. The idea that a playground could spark imagination or bring a community together was completely foreign. Meanwhile, in Europe, something completely different was happening. In 1943, the first adventure playground was created in Denmark. Basically, it was controlled chaos where kids could build their own play structures using scrap lumber, tires, and tools. It was messy, it was risky, but kids absolutely loved it. Still, this European model was way too wild for American suburbs. Insurance companies would have had heart attacks, parents would have called the police, and it would take one architect with a theater background to figure out how to make that model work here. Meet Robert Leathers, Cornell architecture graduate, former theater set designer, and the man who would accidentally revolutionize American playgrounds. In 1971, Leathers helped design a playground for his kids' school in Ithaca, New York. Instead of ordering from a catalog, they built a sprawling wooden fortress from scratch. The result was pure magic. What made the design genius is that Leathers figured out how to capture that European adventure playground spirit and package it for the American communities. His secret weapon was something called Design Day. Instead of adults deciding what kids should play on, Leathers or an architect would sit down with the children themselves. The kids' crayon drawings of castles with secret passages and pirate ships with tire swings became actual architectural blueprints. This marketing approach was revolutionary. For the first time in American playground history, kids were the clients. Sure, the final designs might have been steered by the architects a little bit, but the process felt way more exciting than just ordering off a catalog. Now here's where things get really interesting. The business model behind these wooden kingdoms was unlike anything the playground industry had ever seen. Traditional playground companies worked like any other manufacturer. They built standardized equipment in factories, marked it up significantly, and sold it to schools and municipalities. A typical commercial playground in the 1980s could cost anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000, not including installation fees. Leathers flipped this entire model on its head. Instead of selling products, he was selling an experience. First, communities would pay Leathers and Associates a design fee. typically about $15,000 to $25,000. This covered the initial site visit, design day with the children, and the creation of detailed construction plans. But here's the kicker. The community would buy all the materials themselves directly from lumberyards and suppliers. Therefore, there was no markup and no middleman profits. The construction plans were detailed instruction manuals designed for volunteers with no construction experience. Every board was numbered, every bolt was cataloged, and every step was illustrated. Letters had essentially created IKEA furniture instructions for entire playgrounds. But the real genius was the labor component. Instead of paying professional contractors, the entire community would volunteer their time during the week-long build. And while costs and budgets were always there, these playgrounds created unprecedented community ownership. Think about the psychology here. When a town bought a traditional playground, it was just another municipal purchase. But when hundreds of families spent their weekends building something with their own hands, it became sacred. These playgrounds had literal blood, sweat, and tears built into every board. Doctors worked alongside teachers. Lawyers swung hammers next to grocery store clerks. Parents who had never held a power tool were suddenly constructing elaborate wooden turrets. The social dynamics were incredible. Class barriers disappeared when everyone was covered in sawdust, working hard towards the same goal. The builds became legendary community events. Local restaurants would donate food, and radio stations would broadcast live from the construction site. Kids could camp out to watch their dream playground take shape. By the end of the week, communities had a new playground, but also an empowering sense of what they could accomplish together. Word spread fast. The Washington Post called it a burgeoning movement. The Chicago Tribune dubbed Letters the guru of contemporary playground design. He even appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street, giving these wooden castles a stamp of wholesome American approval. Over 3 decades, Letters and Associates completed over 2,400 projects in all 50 states and 10 foreign countries. These wooden castles had conquered America one community at a time. For kids growing up in that time, these playgrounds were like a fairy tale. Every structure was unique, a custom-built world of hidden passages, wobbly bridges, and soaring towers. A simple trip to Reddit is all it takes to soak in the nostalgia. But the same things that made these playgrounds magical were also creating problems. Aside from the splinters and wasp nests kids had to deal with, these wooden castles were often the target of less well-meaning people who burned them down. However, that pales in comparison to the problems that arose next. By 1999, US emergency rooms were treating over 200,000 playground-related injuries annually. Falls accounted for 79% of injuries on public equipment, and fractures made up 39% of all playground injuries. While they made old playgrounds look boring, these wooden castles were still getting kids hurt at an alarming rate. The rope climbs that seemed so adventurous could result in serious falls. The narrow bridges that sparked imagination could also spark broken arms. What felt like character building risk to one generation was starting to look like negligent design to another. High-profile lawsuits started piling up. Insurance companies began refusing to cover wooden playgrounds or demanding premiums so high that communities could not afford them. The cultural shift was dramatic. The same parents who had grown up fearlessly climbing wooden towers were now terrified of letting their own children take similar risks. The helicopter parent phenomenon was just beginning, and wooden castle playgrounds were becoming symbols of a more dangerous and less responsible past. Then came an even bigger challenge. The Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990, and over the next years, requirements were enforced. Every playground needed accessible routes, compliant surfacing, and equipment that kids in wheelchairs could use. The sprawling, multi-level wooden structures were the opposite of accessible. Those signature wood chips, impossible for wheelchairs to navigate. The uneven terrain and towering heights, were barriers for kids with mobility impairments. Retrofitting a wooden castle for ADA compliance could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, money most communities simply didn't have. And even worse, the modifications often destroyed the very features that made the playground special in the first place. But the final blow came from an unexpected source: the wood itself. For decades, outdoor lumber had been pressure treated with chromated copper arsenate, or CCA for short. This chemical cocktail of chromium, copper, and arsenic prevented rot in insects, but it also contained a well-known human carcinogen. The irony was devastating. The very chemical that made these wooden playgrounds possible and allowed them to avoid rot was potentially poisoning the children who played on them. In 2001, the Environmental Working Group published a bombshell report called Poisoned Playgrounds. Their claim was terrifying. Kids playing regularly on CCA-treated equipment could exceed lifetime cancer risk limits in just weeks. The report painted a nightmare scenario. Children's hands would pick up arsenic residue from the wood. That residue would transfer to their mouths through normal hand-to-mouth behavior, and over time, this exposure could accumulate to dangerous levels. The media went into overdrive. Parents panicked. Florida actually closed playgrounds statewide. The wooden castles weren't just liability risks anymore. They were potential death traps. On the 12th of February 2002, the EPA announced a voluntary agreement to phase out CCA treatment for residential uses, including playgrounds. After December 31st, 2003, it would be illegal to treat new wood with CCA for playground use. This was a death sentence for the entire wooden playground industry. Without CCA treatment, outdoor wooden structures would rot within a few years, and while alternatives existed, they were expensive and less effective. What followed was heartbreaking. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, communities across America began tearing down their wooden castles. The decision was never easy. Town halls would fill up with emotional residents sharing memories of building and playing on their wooden fortress. Some communities held goodbye parties, letting kids take on one last adventure through their wooden kingdom before the demolition crews arrived. They were replaced with the new standard: brightly colored, modular equipment made of plastic and metal. Was it safer? Sure. More accessible? Absolutely. But more exciting? Well, the contrast was stark. Where once stood unique wooden fortresses that sparked imagination, now sat standardized plastic structures that looked identical in every town. The playground industry had essentially returned to the pre-letters era of catalog ordering and corporate uniformity. Some communities tried to save pieces. A painted board here, a small turret there, and there's even a few of these castles that still stand to this day. But the epic era that shaped the childhood of American kids for over 3 decades is by and large over. So what happened to Robert Letters and his revolutionary company? Surprisingly, they're still around. Letters & Associates is now run by Bob's son Mac, and they're still building playgrounds. The materials have changed. Today's letter playgrounds are made from recycled plastic and metal, designed to meet every safety guideline and accessibility standard. They're still unique, still community built, but they're not wooden castles. The company preserved the philosophical core. Kids still draw their dream playgrounds on design day, and communities still come together for the build. The modern Letters playgrounds are undeniably better in many measurable ways. They're safer, more inclusive, and more durable. But with the death of the wooden castle, we lost something else. The belief that it's okay for childhood to be a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more wild, and a little bit unpredictable. If you enjoyed this video, we think you'll like this one next. Thanks for watching The Great Rewind, and feel free to like and subscribe if you appreciate the content.